Hi, everyone. Welcome to January's first EMSL Learn webinar, where today we're going to be discussing tips for how to submit a successful proposal. We're glad that you can join us today for EMSL Learn's webinar series presentation, Tips for How to Submit a Successful Proposal. Our next EMSL Learn webinar will be held on January 26th, and that one will be focused on characterizing atmospheric aerosols. We hope to see you there too. Also, make sure to keep in touch with EMSL by subscribing to our email and social media channels. If you haven't already, the links will be dropped into the chat. Today, we begin with EMSL's Deputy for User Services, Alison Hatt, who will give an overview of EMSL's open calls, the submission process, and tips for applying. After Alison, EMSL's Integrated Research Platform leads, Mary Lipton and Scott Lee, will be discussing their suggestions for submitting a competitive proposal from the scientific planning perspective. And Kevin Solomon, Assistant Professor of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at the University of Delaware, will round out today's presentations by offering his views and experience not only on submitting proposals, but as part of also a part of the review panels for the proposals who grades them. We will leave time at the end of today's webinar for questions. Typically, the EMSL Learn webinars are about 60 minutes long. Today, we are going to be available for 75 minutes so that we can make sure that your questions are answered. We know that you have lots of great questions about how to submit the best proposal possible, so we're here for you. We encourage you to post your questions into the Zoom chat, and the speakers will answer them during the Q&A. And so with that, we'll begin with Alison.
Okay, can you hear me? Sorry, my controls disappeared to turn on my video. Here we go.
Yes,
okay. Okay, sorry about that. Hi, everyone. I am Alison Hatt. I am the Deputy of User Services, as Linda mentioned, and I will get us kicked off today. If I can control the screen. There we go. So first, I'm going to talk about our calls for proposals, several of which are currently open. So we have an annual call for large-scale research proposals that's open right now. These can last up to 2 years, and they have a fairly broad scope. Letters of intent for that call are due in a few weeks on February 10th, and I will say a bit more about those letters of intent on the next slide. So next, we have 2 FICUS calls that are currently open. FICUS allows researchers to get access to more than one user facility through a single proposal. The first FICUS call listed here is with ARM, the Atmospheric Radiation Measurement Facility. LOIs for that call are also due on February 10th. And earlier this week, we opened the FICUS call with the Joint Genome Institute, JGI. That call also includes the Center for Structural Molecular Biology at Oak Ridge and the National Ecological Observatory Network this year. LOIs for that call are due in mid-March. And then later in the year, in early June, we will open a call for exploratory proposals as well. These have a shorter duration of 9 or 10 months. We also have opportunities to submit proposals outside of the annual calls each year, such as the limited scope proposals. Those are a great opportunity to do a short proof of concept type of proposal that can be accomplished within about a month. You can learn more about all of these different types of proposals and see the open calls at our website down here, emsl.pnnl.gov/proposals. So there are the opportunities that you have currently. So next, we will talk a little bit about the review process. So in order to write a good proposal, it really helps to know a bit about how proposals are submitted and reviewed. So here I am showing the steps for creating and reviewing a new proposal. First, we issue a call for proposals. Those appear on our website, and you can subscribe to our mailing list, follow us on social media. As Linda mentioned, that's a great way to learn about new calls right when they are announced. Each call has a specific focus topic, and proposals submitted to that call need to be responsive to one of those focus topics. Each call also has a list of highlighted capabilities, which are instruments or tools that are particularly well suited for addressing the focus topics. So once you learn about a call, the next step is to submit a letter of intent, or LOI. We screen those LOIs for responsiveness to the call topics and for alignment to BER mission. At this stage, we provide the user with any feedback we might have about their project to help make sure that you are proposing something that can actually be done at our facility and that makes good use of the available resources. We also provide a scientific point of contact for the users at this stage to make sure that they're talking to our staff about their project. The great majority of LOIs are successful, and this step is really intended to help users create strong proposals. If your LOI is successful, you will be invited to submit a full proposal. Full proposals for the major calls can't be submitted without an invitation, so you have to make sure you get your foot in the door at the LOI stage. Again, if you don't submit an LOI, you won't be able to submit a proposal to that call. So then next, those proposals go through technical and safety reviews by our staff, where again, we're looking to make sure that the work being proposed is feasible. And you will be hearing next from a couple of the people who actually do those technical reviews of your proposals. Then the proposals go through a rigorous peer review by panels of external subject matter experts. You'll also be hearing from someone today who's on a review panel. Based on those peer review results, awards are made and successful projects can start work. So that is an overview of the process. And now let's talk a little bit about tips for writing a successful proposal. You're going to hear many of my tips repeated by the following speakers. They're going to provide additional nuance and insight, but it's worth hearing these more than once. So the first tip here is to carefully read the guidance and requirements specific to the proposal call that you are applying to. We try to make our guidance as clear as possible, but there's a lot of it and it changes over time. And failing to provide the required information or follow all the steps is going to hurt your prospects of getting approved. Next, you also need to read those focus topics and highlighted capabilities carefully and make sure that your proposal is responsive to them. BER program managers, that's our sponsor, they provide input on those focus topics. So being responsive to them will help ensure that your proposal is aligned to BER interests and priorities. I'll say a bit more about that later. That's important to us. The next tip here is to make use of the available educational resources that EMSL provides, which you're already doing by attending this webinar. But we also have quite a bit more content on our website that tells users about our capabilities and how to write successful proposals. I'm showing a couple of links here. The first is to the EMSL Learn website, which has learning courses about our many capabilities. You'll find loads of videos there from past meetings and summer schools and webinars like this one. The second link here is to the user program section of our website, where you can find details about the user program policies, as well as all of the various calls that we have and how to apply. Oops. All right, so now let's talk about writing your proposal. My first tip here is to write to the review criteria. And that means reading those review criteria, which are available on the call announcement pages. Different calls have different review criteria. So read the review criteria for the call that you're applying to, and then make sure it's going to be clear to a reviewer reading your proposal how your proposal satisfies those criteria. Reviewers are using those criteria when they score your proposals. You want to make sure that you address them and make it easy for the reviewers to evaluate your work. And again, you can find those review criteria on the call announcement webpage for that specific call down at the bottom of the page. So next, one of the review criteria will address mission alignment. So again, we are funded to support BER science, and this mission alignment is really important to us and to our sponsor. So make sure that you're familiar with BER mission, the grand challenges, the workshop reports. You can find all of that fairly easily on the BER website, and we have some links to that from our web pages as well. So the next tip here in orange is to provide clear objectives, hypotheses, project plan, and that would include analysis and what you plan to do with the data. and your need for the facility. So don't make it difficult for reviewers to tease out what you're planning to do and what you want to achieve. And our next couple of speakers are definitely going to go into more detail on this section. And then finally, make sure that you're tailoring your proposal to EMSL and the specific call to which you are applying. Definitely don't make the mistake of cutting and pasting from another grant proposal and just sending it along. It will not go down well with reviewers. Similarly, if you are resubmitting a rejected proposal, make sure that you address reviewer concerns and make some changes. On this final slide, I have just 3 more tips. 1, and this is perhaps the best tip that I'm going to give you today, is to contact EMSL staff for support when you are preparing your proposal. This can mean reaching out to User Services Office if you don't understand the requirements. User Services, you can reach us at emsl@pnnl.gov. But more importantly, it means talking to our scientific staff about what it is you're trying to do. Our staff are available to talk to users about your project and can help you with things like figuring out what specific resources you should request in your proposal, how much instrument time is likely to be required. It's a really fantastic resource, but just make sure you contact them a couple of weeks before the deadline and not at the last minute. If you're having trouble figuring out which scientist you should be reaching out to, start with that User Services email and we'll get you pointed in the right direction. So the second tip here is to put together a strong team with the expertise and track record needed to execute the project that you're proposing. And of course, again, make sure it's apparent to reviewers that your team is strong and that they have a good track record and so on. Finally, be persistent. These calls can be really competitive, and it is not unusual for a PI to have to resubmit a couple of times before they get funded. So don't give up, read the reviewer comments. If you get rejected, talk to the staff again and strengthen your proposal and try again. So with that, I will pass it over to our next speaker.
Can you hear me? I suddenly lost my ability to show my video. Start video. Okay. Can everyone hear me?
Yep, you're great.
So thanks, Alison, for that introduction. I'm Mary Lipton. I'm an integrated research platform lead for the biomolecular pathways, and Scott Lee and I are going to talk about some of our ideas, thoughts, and suggestions for submitting a competitive proposal. The first tip that I have is, I'm going to talk about proposal preparation. The first tip I have is to generate a compelling hypothesis and clearly define your science questions. The strongest proposals that I've seen come through are extremely clear with what they want to accomplish, what their question is, what their hypothesis is, and then how the research is going to answer the hypothesis. So have either a clear scientific question or a clear, definable, actionable hypothesis with specific objections or objectives, sorry. Frame your idea to emphasize what is novel about it. Talk about why this is new, how this is going to advance the state of the science or the state of the art. Really hone in on what are you trying to answer. Again, Alison had mentioned a lot of times we see proposals that were clearly cut and paste from other proposals, NSF proposals or other BER proposals, and they come from larger proposals and you tend to lose that question. And so really look at your proposal to make sure you have emphasized what is the question you're trying to answer, and then what is the approach you're going to use to answer that question. And then also look at why EMSL. So talk about how the EMSL resources will benefit your research and how you will be able to advance the state of your research using the resources. Another thing I want to expound on that Alison mentioned is please contact us before submitting your letter of intent. We are here to help you. Both the integrated research platform leads and the staff scientists are here to help guide you, to help bounce ideas off of. We can help guide your ideas, help hone your scientific question. One of the things that our staff are really good at is listening to your question and then giving you ideas on how to address it. So coming in and saying, I don't know how to use everything in EMSL, what do I do? That's a lot of the things that we are very good at doing. So we can help guide your proposal. We are also able to advise on what's possible. What's the right size of your proposal? How many samples can you reasonably do? One of the things I've seen is proposals that come in that are huge and they just want everything for everything, though that isn't necessarily necessary to answer your question. So talking to the staff about what is possible and what's the right scope is really important. The other thing that we're able to do is our staff scientists know everything in EMSL. And a lot of times when users come in or potential users come in, they're saying, I want to do microscopy or I want to do NMR, and they don't know the whole suite of analytics that we have available at EMSL. And so one of the things that certainly the IRP leads can do and on our staff scientists is point to other capabilities. That if you come in with your question, we can say, oh yeah, you can do NMR, but here are some other analytics that will also help answer your question. And so you can get a broader range of what EMSL offers to enrich your science that you wouldn't normally be able to do just by looking at a website. And then of course we can suggest useful methods or approaches you may not have thought about, and then refer you to the appropriate staff. Come on. And then the last thing I want to emphasize is preparation is to start early. Do not wait until 2 days before the LOI is due before you start thinking about this. The earlier you reach out to the EMSL staff and the IRP leads, the more attention you will get. To be perfectly honest, you can imagine as the deadline approaches, we get more and more requests for our time, and that the amount of time that we have to spend on any individual potential user gets smaller and smaller. So if you reach out early, we actually have more available time to work with potential users on honing their ideas, getting the right analytics, and getting it scoped correctly. We as IRP leads can provide feedback on proposal drafts and LOI drafts prior to submission. So unlike a program manager at a granting institution, we are here to help. We are here to use as a resource. So please reach out to us. And the last thing is keep your eye on the deadlines. If the deadline says a certain date at 5 p.m. Pacific time, that doesn't mean 6 p.m. That means 5 p.m. So I've had a lot of users just completely miss that deadline by hours to days, and then we can't open that call back up. So please keep your eye on the deadlines. So I'm going to pass it off to Scott to talk about what makes a strong proposal and the components we look for a strong proposal.
Thank you, Mary. As Mary talked about before, I am an integrated research platform lead for structural biology in EMSL. And I'm going to continue a little bit on some of the tips and tricks I'm going to suggest for making strong proposals. Specifically to the proposal itself, you would be surprised how many people actually do not provide a clear hypothesis or scientific question. That's just good scientific method, and it reviews very well. So do not put in sentences like, I'm going to change the ionic strength or the pH of my solutions and see how the protein structure changes with it is. You need to put in a specific hypothesis, and if you need to go in and label H1 or Q1 or something like that to make it really clear what you're talking about, you can do that as well, but that's not necessary. Secondly, probably a big portion of this is going to be clear in your experimental designs. What samples will you be sending? How many, what the form is? Can you be a little bit specific about what samples you will be sending so we understand what it is that we're trying to measure? If you're going to be using EMSL resources, let us know which resources are going to be used for which sample sets. You'll be surprised at the number of people say, I want to use NMR, I want to use mass spec, and they want to send samples in. And we don't understand which samples are for which instrument. So try to be clear on which resources you're requesting for the different samples. For the resources that you're asking for, be specific about the measurements that you want to make. Do not say something along the lines of, I will use TEM to characterize my aerosol particles. That does not provide the peer reviewers with enough information. What you want to say is something on the order of, I will use energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy to map the elemental distribution of cobalt ions on the surfaces, and that will, this segregation will help support my hypothesis, which I made earlier. So, and then, if you could be clear that way, rather than just being generic about what you're trying to measure, that will be very useful for the peer reviewers. Provide a guide of how the data will be used to push the research forward. Specifically, I will make this measurement and this will actually cause my research to expand in this direction and so forth. So be clear about, what the data will be used for. And as I alluded to earlier, if you're using multiple sets of instruments, be clear on which data will be used for which set of samples. Oops, I'm going back. I must have pushed a button. Sorry about that. If combining with measurements from your home institution, basically be clear on, what resources you're going to be asking for at EMSL and which one you're going to be at home institutions. Sometimes what's going to happen is you're going to make some requests and the peer reviewers won't see how you're going to make or support your hypothesis without this additional measurement. And so if that measurement comes from your home institution, refer to it, but don't elaborate to a large degree on what it will, what you need to do. Provide a timeline and sample collection and delivery to EMSL, specifically if you're doing like a field work for aerosol projects, basically say I'm going to collect samples in March and I'm going to do the analysis in May. That will be useful for us and also demonstrates the peer reviewers that you thought very carefully about how your proposal logistics are going forward. And then finally, make a measure assessment of the benefits of research, and be a little bit sensitive here and don't make grand overstatements of, what this is going to do it. Peer reviewers can actually see through this very well. And so if you make these grand overstatements, this actually is really harmful to your proposal. Moving on, going back to what Alison had said earlier, we provide language in the call. So make sure you point back to that language in your proposal. Specifically, I will address this issue in the call language. Also familiarize yourself with BER's missions and specifically how your research is going to be, how well your research aligns to BER. And so the better you can make those connections and make it clear to the peer reviewer, the better your chances you will have. If you're using a model system, it'd be really useful if it were BER relevant. However, it doesn't necessarily have to be. It doesn't sort of disqualify you. But if you have to use something like a health-related model system, you can demonstrate why you need to have that, but then you have to show a progression of how you're going to get to the BER relevant systems and specifically what BER relevant systems you're going to be after. And then finally, at the end of your description, articulate the outcome of the project and the impact it will have on the advancement of BER. And again, as I alluded to earlier, do not overstate what this impact will be. And then as a general rule, focus on comprehensibility. Don't assume reviewers know all the jargon. Some of them are very well versed in it, but some do not know your special expertise. And so be clear on sort of the background and the jargon and so forth. So you need to educate reviewers, but don't go into this large, long description of that because you have a limited page limit in which you have to put all your information in. And if you expand too much on your background, that doesn't give you enough information or a time of, that doesn't give you enough space for you actually to put in your approach and other things that are relevant for your proposal. Ensure your proposal is concise and well written. As Alison alluded before, don't grab and from previous proposals and cut and paste. It looks really bad. Peer reviewers can see right through it. And then finally, do one last check and make sure that you're not missing any important elements. So those are what I have here. And so I will turn it over now to Kevin, who will talk about his experiences in submitting proposals and what peer reviewers look for.
Hello, everyone. Right. There we go. So hello, everyone. My name is Kevin Solomon. I am an assistant professor and have been a user at EMSL for almost 10 years now, both as a postdoc, so in projects mentored, supervised by my postdoc mentor, and now as an independent PI. I'm also on the user advisory committee. So as you work with EMSL, if you have any comments about or any feedback about your experiences, please relay them to me, and I'll take that to management. Now, before I get into the nitty-gritty of how to prepare a proposal, I wanted to take a step back and kind of talk about some of the reasons for why you want to even work with EMSL. I think there's a lot been said about the large-scale infrastructure and the access that we can get to do really cutting-edge science. However, at least when I started this and worked with EMSL for the first time, something that I hadn't fully appreciated was that you are not only getting technical technicians, you're not getting just access to infrastructure, but you're actually getting technical expertise and true collaborators. And so you should view EMSL as true partners and collaborators in your science, and engage them as much as possible to really develop fruitful projects. The other advantage beyond that technical is that it is an easier or lower barrier entry point into the DOE funding landscape. As has been highlighted, there are a number of funding opportunities during the year. And sometimes there are multiple cycles per year. And so you have multiple chances at bat to kind of learn more about what the DOE is looking for. And once you get access to the EMSL, I think, and you have the opportunity to serve as a reviewer, you get a wider perspective of what DOE values, which may or may not be advantageous when you think about more traditional funding opportunities within the DOE. So now that you've decided to compete, what exactly do you have to do? As has been mentioned, you have to prepare an LOI, which is really just reviewed for programmatic fit. But then you also have to, if your LOI does meet that criteria and is invited for a full proposal, then you prepare a slightly longer document, which goes through 2 rounds of review. The first round, which is technical review by the EMSL staff, which is evaluated for technical feasibility, and then the second round by subject matter experts, which is what you typically expect or think of when you think about peer review. I'm only really just highlighting this because the technical review, while it doesn't carry a significant score, it is an opportunity for EMSL staff to highlight the resource allocation or the resource needs, and therefore the scope of your project. And so those comments are seen by the peer reviewers. And so, for example, you might have proposed really fantastic science, but it requires a lot of resources. And the EMSL staff will highlight that, and perhaps suggest that there's a reduction in scope, at which point one might determine that your scientific objectives are no longer feasible. And so it's very critical to engage EMSL staff early to kind of make sure that the scope of your resource request matches your science. And so going into specific tips, you've heard it from several people. You want to consult with EMSL staff and engage early. As has been said, they'll help with scope, They'll help point you towards appropriate resources, as well as just general technical feasibility. That being said, it's also an opportunity for you to socialize more resource-intensive projects. And so, for example, you might have a project that is just so compelling, but it also requires a lot of resources, more so than a typical project. If you can convince the relevant EMSL staff that might be a good use of resources, they may note in their technical review that even though this is a larger ask than normal, this is a worthwhile endeavor. And again, those comments are seen by the subject matter experts. And so you do want to engage with staff just to, at the very least, get a sense for how things will be received, and if possible, convince them that these larger asks are worthwhile. The other more subtle reason for why you might want to consult with EMSL staff, which hasn't been discussed, is the opportunity for you to identify capacity building projects. So what do I mean by that? EMSL, like any other facility, is trying to expand their capabilities with each year. And so they might get new instrumentation, they might get new techniques to push the sensitivity of the measurements that are possible. And with those improvements, they're going to have to develop a user base. And so if you, in your conversations with EMSL staff, they might highlight this and tell you that, hey, this new capability is coming online, we haven't really used it, and so we need a pilot project, and it sounds like your science is greatly aligned with that. And that alignment with in helping EMSL to advance the capabilities that they offer to the greater community can be quite compelling. And so identifying those things and highlighting them when you write your proposal is something that I would encourage if possible. So EMSL resources are, given their shared nature, you really want to highlight not only how you're doing great science, but how you're going to impact your field, impact American society potentially, or even just impact the EMSL user community. And so that is done by really addressing and being responsive to the review criteria. And so, for example, all proposals are reviewed on scientific merit, and that typically encompasses what you normally think of, such as like clear hypotheses, just well-justified approaches, signs of innovation, et cetera. You're evaluated on team qualifications. So for example, your track record in working in a given field. As was just alluded to, you also want to highlight relevance to EMSL and the BER mission, as well as potential impact on EMSL science areas. So that you want to highlight that the work that you're doing aligns with these EMSL science areas, as well as, or that they have the potential to advance EMSL capabilities. And I've highlighted these last 2 points primarily because even though they're probably worth about a third of the score in your evaluation, it's one of the things that people tend to overlook the most. I mean, the language they use to describe this relevance tends to be buried. And so I would strongly encourage that when you prepare your proposal, that you have a section that is called relevance to EMSL mission. And similarly, I would ensure that you reflect the language that's in the calls that are in the BER and EMSL mission statements, so that to make it easier for the reviewer to kind of highlight the strengths of your proposal in these dimensions. It's just something that's frequently overlooked. And just broadly speaking, again, because you're talking about access to large scale infrastructure, you really want to sell or highlight how the findings, how the findings of this work will impact that broader community. And so having letters of support from people from people in the community, highlighting perhaps opportunities for which you're going to make this data available. So say, for example, you're doing a large number of metabolomics experiments, and so you're going to put those measurements in an online database, et cetera. Highlighting those opportunities such that we can see that the science being done will benefit a wide swath of users beyond just you is always advantageous. And then finally, my last tip is that I would be very explicit with resource needs. You heard that you should talk about the fact that you need to use this specific instrumentation. You should also highlight how many samples, perhaps how long each sample will need to be processed, as well as when these samples should be submitted. And if you're not an expert in these instrumentations, I mean, this is where your conversations with EMSL's staff can be really helpful in determining what those specific needs are. However, you do want to articulate it in your proposal, because as part of the evaluation process, even though there are no physical dollars being exchanged, the resources that are committed to your project are finite. They do have a dollar value associated with it. And so the powers that be, so beyond the peer reviewers, they do want to make sure that those needs can be adequately balanced across a fiscal year. And of course, you should also indicate how you will engage with EMSL staff. If you need support beyond data acquisition, if you need help with interpretation and data analysis, you should also put those requests up front. I will say that being said, even though you want to be explicit as much as possible with what your specific ask of EMSL is, you do want to describe the broader context of your science. And so you do want to describe the broader scientific experiments. If the EMSL data will be paired with other studies in your lab or at some other institution, you do want to highlight those things and how they integrate to create stronger science. And this was something that I was guilty of when I prepared my first proposal as a PI, that I kind of had a lot of tunnel vision on what I wanted of EMSL and didn't really talk enough about the broader context of the science that I was trying to do. So just to kind of summarize some of these tips, and I think some of what other people have highlighted already, some common missteps that I've seen are that hypotheses or timelines for sample submission are very unclear. I've seen that the resources that were requested are insufficient for scope, or conversely, I've seen that the resources that were requested were too much, and then they were scaled back to a point where they were insufficient to justify or satisfy the scientific objectives as they were written. To help with this resource allocation, you do want to provide preliminary data or indicate that you have a fairly confident assessment for when samples will be ready, because again, you want to make sure that EMSL can allocate the appropriate resources to your project, and it would be undesirable if an allocation was made but your samples were not ready. That is a missed opportunity for others in the community that could have benefited. As I alluded to, you really want to highlight mission relevance both at BER and EMSL. Again, you want to specifically highlight it, have a section marked mission relevance, just because it's very easy to overlook. And while the peer reviewers are scientific experts, and so, for example, they may be very familiar with proteomics or whatever techniques that you're interested in, they may not be as interested in your model system. And so in some cases, it can be challenging for them to justify mission relevance unless you help them out by explicitly calling that out. As I mentioned before, it can be easy to describe the resource need only, but you should be justifying your entire project, including things outside of EMSL, as well as highlighting why EMSL is critical, and not just nice to have. Why are there not alternative methods that could be used? And then finally, you want to have a description of impact and next steps. And so, for example, talking about how your scientific community, your field can be advanced, having letters of support, those are all things that would be helpful. And so, in conclusion, things to make a strong proposal is consult with EMSL staff early and often. You want to be sure that you respond to call and review criteria and highlight these to make it easier for reviewers. You want to highlight the impact and the importance of your science and why EMSL is indispensable to it. You want to show that you will be a good steward of of shared resources, and that your work will support the efforts of a larger research community, either through the EMSL user community, because you will be a pilot project to help develop capacity X, or because the data that you generate will be indispensable to answer questions A, B, C in your field. And of course, you want to just write a good proposal. You want to have clear hypotheses, objectives, timeline, have a sense of potential products, and all the like. And at the top, and that's all I had to share.
Great. Well, hey, thank you everyone for your great presentations. And we are going to move into the Q&A portion of the webinar now. So we got a couple questions submitted. And so if you have any more questions, please continue, add them to the chat. We'll get to them. So let's start with, I believe this one is going for Mary or Scott. Is it worthwhile to show how your research applies to more than one BER mission objectives, or just to more than one, or to just stick with one? I always find that my proposals hit a few objectives, but mentioning all of them eats into the limited page, the page limit.
So I answered this in the chat, and I guess I'll reiterate what I said is, it's always good to point out where you align with BER mission across the board. And if you have space to point that out, but not at the detriment of the science and the describing the science and the approach. If you're aligned with BER mission, and you can show that by pointing to one mission objective, and then still spend time having a strong science objective description, and especially an approach description, your proposal is going to review much better than if you have a strong BER mission and then skimp on the rest of it.
Right. How is risk assessed with certain experiments in a proposal? For instance, is troubleshooting with EMSL to develop a technique applauded by reviewers or considered too much of a risk? So do you want me to repeat that question? Yes, okay. How is risk assessed with certain experiments in a proposal? For instance, is troubleshooting with can we troubleshoot with EMSL to develop a technique applauded by reviewers, or is that considered too much of a risk? So I guess risk assessment.
I guess I might be able to address this. I would say that in peer review, we take our lead from the technical review, and so I think if you're truly interested in pursuing troubleshooting, I think this is something that you would have to socialize and get buy-in from your EMSL contact. And hopefully that would be reflected in the technical review. If that language was not reflected in the technical review, then it would not be viewed favorably.
All right. Another one is, can faculty from another country apply? It says Allison.
Yes, absolutely. The calls are open to anyone in the world to apply to.
Wonderful. Okay. Hi, Allison, Mary, Scott, Kevin. Great presentations. By the way, this is from John Barger. Thank you. One additional thought. Have you discussed the appropriate scope for proposals? For example, do successful proposals typically assess a single hypothesis or question, or several? How many is too many based on successful proposals?
I think I'll take a stab at that one. So understand that EMSL, we are of a significant budget limit. And so we can only accommodate so many proposals, and our resources also have a certain number of time that we can allocate proposals on. So, I mean, if you have a scope that requests 2 or 3 full months worth of NMR work or whatever, that's probably going to be out of the question, or mass spec or something like that. And it really depends on, basically, how much of your scientific hypothesis or question can be handled within a specific, amount of time. And that doesn't necessarily mean that, I have X hours on this instrument and so forth, because some instruments have a more availability than others. But, generally, if you're having to ask for many months worth of time on an instrument, it's to get the scope done. It's not going to be feasible. However, if you can do it within a reasonable amount of work, yeah, we can handle a significant scope, number of hypotheses, I would say.
Can I just add that the IRP leads are here to help you figure out what an appropriate scope is. And so interacting with us early on can help define that scope that would fit within what we see as reasonable and fundable.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Next one, I am unclear how big a large scale proposal is. Must it involve multiple institutions, hundreds or thousands of samples, or is it related to the instrument usage?
I'm going to say it's related to your scientific question. You want to propose the number of samples needed to answer your scientific question. However, I will put in there that if it's hundreds or thousands, we'll probably scale the question back. But it's really about making sure you're doing coherent science that you can convey to the reviewers of, this is my science, here's how I'm going to answer this question, and here's how I'm going to push that frontier of science forward. So the scope is related to your question.
And I'd add, if the project the scope is small enough that you could have done it as a limited scope proposal, or even as maybe an exploratory, then you probably shouldn't be applying to the large scale research call. So it's not so much that there is a threshold, you must have a scope large enough to be in that call, but rather if it's small enough that you could fit it somewhere else, then that would be more appropriate.
And therein lies, talk to EMSL staff to make sure that it's the appropriate size or it's the appropriate call. All right, can you select the EMSL person you want to work with?
So our proposal form does have a field where you are asked to enter the names of anyone on the staff that you've already been talking to. And so we would use that as a starting point to find out who might be an appropriate point of contact or person to work with. But we're going to make sure that you're working with the right people to do the work. Mary, Scott, you might be able to elaborate more on that.
No. Okay. All right.
You're fine.
So here's sometimes for young researchers, it can be challenging to back up an idea with publications. How challenging is it for acceptance of the proposal?
I want to give this one to Kevin since he serves on the review panels and looks at that.
Yeah, so I guess it depends on what you mean by publication. I think for good grantsmanship, you want to justify your science, and so you will need to cite the literature. That literature doesn't have to be you. That being said, you don't necessarily have to have an extensive track record in the specifics. Well, okay, sorry, I'm trying to carefully word this. I think in terms of track record, I think what's important here is that you have a a stable and productive publication history, and that you very broadly are an expert in, have expertise in the area that you propose to work in. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have 50 papers in this really narrow field. It doesn't mean that you have had to have published those papers, like 1 or 2 papers in the last 5 years, but you do, like, if you have never worked with a microbe before, you should not propose any projects that involve microbial biochemistry, at least without sufficient collaborative support and expertise around to fill that gap. And so I guess in terms of publications, we're just looking to see that you're able to move projects forward and close them out in a way that's relevant to what you proposed.
Great. Do research proposal ideas have to be aligned with existing funded projects?
No, they don't.
Yeah.
In short, no, they don't. So it needs to be relevant to BER missions and EMSL mission, but they don't have to be funded.
Great.
I was just going to add that, yeah, in terms of funded projects, I think you only have to demonstrate that you have a mechanism to fund the generation of samples. So whether it's startup or some other mechanism, that's fine. It doesn't have to be a BER proposal or something significant.
All right, another great question. Can postdocs apply to any of the calls, to all of them, to none of them?
Postdocs may apply, but they will need a co-PI who is at a higher, is at like a faculty or a career level.
Okay. Is the technical review performed only by your specific IRP lead, or is it a panel of different leads in EMSL?
It will be, the technical review will be done by the IRP leads from any IRP that is going to be involved in the project. So, we'll have a look and we'll ask you to identify in your proposal which IRPs may be involved, but we're also going to reevaluate that and make sure that we've got the right ones identified. And then the Marys and the Scotts of the world will all be looking at that proposal and talking to one another about it.
Great. Another one, wonderful, very informative, thank you. Can you please share a few example proposals that you've received?
Yeah, I appreciate this as a reminder. We used to have a couple out there. It is challenging sometimes to find users who are willing to let us just share their proposal with the world. And I think our old examples were a bit too outdated. But I will make a note of trying to refresh those because I recognize how helpful that can be. Mm-hmm. If you are a user and you've had a successful proposal and you would like to share one, let me know.
Right. Mary, Scott, or Kevin, can you think off the top of your head, maybe an example of 1 or 2 proposals that were memorable and that generated great results and just were a great project to work with?
There are a number of them that come to mind that have produced very high level publications. They were proposals that reviewed quite well. They were clearly written and then ended up being producing high level publications, but I'm going to hesitate to call out specific users on a webinar right now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we can, well, just whomever had submitted this question, just know that we're looking to put some more examples up on the website to help guide newer users who are maybe would like to see some examples. So
I would, just one thing I'd add, we do have on our website all of the prior awards. So we don't have the full proposal up there, but you can see the title, the abstract, the participants, and that's that may help address what you're looking for.
Yeah. Okay, most agencies prefer to see preliminary results in a proposal. How important is that for an EMSL proposal?
So I'll take this one really quickly. EMSL proposals are 4 pages, and there's not a lot of room for preliminary results, especially, and this goes back to the multiple mission statements as well. The preliminary results are not going to help you as much as explaining your scientific question and explaining your approach, defining your samples, letting the reviewers understand the exact research you want to do in EMSL. So while preliminary data is important to define, to explain the samples you're going to be bringing in, don't put it in only not at the detriment of explaining the science, explaining the approach, and defining your samples.
Okay. So this one, so we had that question before about can postdocs apply? Well, now we've got a question, can a PhD student apply if they have a co-PI supervisor?
You cannot be the PI on the proposal. So you can be the person writing it, but you can't serve as PI as a student.
Okay. All right. So how do I know what instruments to ask for? Go for it, Scott.
So, yeah, so I would say that we've now binned our instruments into instrument groups. And so you don't have to ask for a specific instrument. And typically what happens is our RRP leads, when they see those, they will assign the appropriate instrument that is needed to do the research at that point. So you do not have to know what instrument you're looking for. Sometimes there are users who know specifically what they want and they know what instrument they're asked for. In those cases, put it down, but it's not necessary, it's not needed to know what instrument you need when you're writing a proposal.
Okay. Well, we are at the end of our questions. So, actually, we've got one more that just came in, and I think I'm going to, this will be the last question. We can go ahead and end at the hour mark. If applying for computational resources, do I need to provide any script or preliminary results?
So you will be asked to provide a bit of information about the code you want to run and whether you need help compiling it, things like that. You don't have to give us a copy of your scripts. And as far as preliminary result goes, see a previous question about, it's good to include if you can, but it shouldn't be your first priority to squeeze it in there.
Yeah, all right. At this moment, we have no more questions. So unless we, does anybody have any burning questions to add to the chat window or to ask our panelists? I see lots of thank yous. So thank you to everyone who's attended today. All right. So happy Wednesday, or the rest of your Wednesday, everyone. We look forward to seeing lots of really fabulous proposals coming through for the large scale proposal and the ficus calls that are open right now. Make sure to register for our next webinar on January 26th. The registration link is in the chat window, and please also complete an event survey that will be emailed to you on tomorrow. So with that, thank you. Have a great day.